Hey everyone, welcome back to A Year of Final Fantasy, and welcome to the first of this month's gauntlet of Final Fantasy VII games. We're in the month of Ifrit, and we're going to be going on quite the journey looking at the expanded universe of Final Fantasy VII. Today we're going to be looking at Crisis Core as part of an expanded Final Fantasy VII project, and this game was actually the fourth entry in that expanded universe. However, there's a reason I'm talking about it first, and that's because Crisis Core was the prequel to Final Fantasy VII, and it originally released on the PlayStation Portable in the second half of 2007, and it came out in September in Japan, and over here and the rest of the world in the first half of 2008. So in Crisis Core, the game follows Zack Fair and his story, which was only briefly touched on in Final Fantasy VII, and that being said, it was actually a huge part of Final Fantasy VII's main story, and it's clear why they wanted to expand on this with this particular game in this way. The game takes place 7 years before Final Fantasy VII proper, and as such, many of the characters that we knew are mostly out of the picture, save for those that are tied to Shinra itself. People like Zack and Sephiroth and some other characters, which I won't mention here. Of course, as many prequels are known to do, there are obvious nods to the Final Fantasy VII universe in a sort of, hey, remember that kind of moment, as well as some small cameos. More interesting though is that there are some new characters that are introduced that are actually fairly integral to the Final Fantasy VII mythos just in general. Characters such as one known as Genesis, which aren't actually mentioned in Final Fantasy VII itself anywhere. And as normal, I'm not going to really go too much into the story. Suffice it to say that it delves much more into the experiments of Shinra and those related to the Genova projects. It's interesting to see the world before the events of Final Fantasy VII. Many places are differently named, or incomplete, such as Midgar, as it actually hasn't been built up as a whole city yet. I really enjoy the prequels for this fact. I like the expanding of familiarity of the world and the universe and all of that, assuming it's done in a good way, and here in Crisis Core it is, save for my little, I don't know, kind of nagging suspicion of Genesis. I don't necessarily know if I like how they handled that character, but that's for you to decide. Definitely decide that for yourself. As far as the game itself goes, by the time this game came out, Final Fantasy VII itself had been out for more than 10 years, and the buzz about that game had never really subsided. Even as of this recording, Final Fantasy VII still comes up in conversation regularly, and this is in 2017. This is 20 years later. Oh my god, that's crazy. I played Final Fantasy VII when it first came out. Now it's 20 years later. Anyway, yeah, so the game itself, it was wanted, it was needed by the fans, and they listened, and then they gave us this Final Fantasy VII compilation type of deal. Anyway, a few years earlier, Kingdom Hearts had come out and was a smash success, as obviously everyone's clamoring for Kingdom Hearts 3. And with this big success though about Kingdom Hearts, you can really feel a general shift in Square Enix at this point to move toward this kind of action-based gameplay, and Crisis Core obviously feels more in that line, like Kingdom Hearts, rather than a traditional Final Fantasy, turn-based fighting game. Technically, it is still turn-based in the way that the system is handled, and the expediency of the battles is just a clear shift from that slow ATB system that we're used to. And this really split up a lot of fans on the philosophy of whether this should have been changed or not. And what you're going to see is that most people enjoy this regardless, whether or not they agree on the change that should have happened, just on a fundamental level. It's still widely considered a good, decent, and solid game. And actually stemming from that, we're going to see a lot of debates about the future of Final Fantasy as we move forward into the more recent games of the franchise. But other than that divide there, all the core elements of the world returns, chocobos, summons, materias, all that kind of stuff, though they're handled in different ways to accommodate the different battle system. The game is also handled a little bit different in the way that the story is presented. It's more of a kind of a mission-based games where the story itself is presented in such a way where as you go through, you'll unlock more missions, and I mean, really any game handles like this, but it's just more in a discreet way, picking up with the portable aspect of this game being on the PSP. And the main bulk of the story is, it's fairly short, I guess, for a Final Fantasy game, but that's fine. It clocks anywhere from 12 to 20 hours, however fast you want to go through it, but there's a ton of additional side content to do, which gives this game a pretty big longevity, especially for a portable game, so you get a bang for your buck, basically. The graphics are amazingly good. I still love them to this day, and I think that most people will be enjoying this game visually. It's interesting because it's a clear move towards, again, the modern Final Fantasy that we kind of see today with everything. But of course, the original game, hadn't really aged well visually, and I think we can all agree on that. So whenever they were going to upgrade the world, they had quite a bit of leeway, I guess, to make things as they would look now. And it's nice to get a glimpse of this universe with these new visuals, even if only in a prequel. But of course, we have the remake on the way, assuming it comes out before the end of time. And really, just some other interesting information, kind of annoying information really, is that as much as people do enjoy Crisis Core, there has never been a release on PSN, on the PSP or Vita, or any kind of port or anything like that due to licensing issues with some of the music that's in the game, which is just a shame because a lot of people really want to play this game and they can't because of these musical licensing issues. Hopefully at some point they can go back and maybe retrofit the game, upgrade it, update it, and release it for a new generation to enjoy, because again, it is a solid game. So if you have a PSP, if you can play physical games on your PSP, definitely pick this one up while you can, or even if you still can. It's worth to see it, especially with the events leading up to Final Fantasy VII and specifically what Zack's story is. And if you've played Final Fantasy VII, you obviously know that we just get that very brief glimpse of the end of his story. Anyway, there are a lot of cool moments that should be experienced for fans, especially if you are a fan of this particular installment of this franchise. So I'm going to leave it there. Let me know if you've played it, what you think of the game, for yourself. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, and as always, until the next time, Crystal Warriors, keep on gaming.